Welcome to Beyond Distribution with GTDC. In this podcast series, we have discussions around trends and events in the IT industry. The podcast is hosted by Frank Vitagliano, CEO of the Global Technology Distribution Council, or GTDC. Today, we have two guests from IDC's executive team. Eric Prothero is the SVP of Worldwide Tracker Research and Corporate Development, and Steve White is the Program VP of Channel and Alliances. Today's conversation focuses on how tech community members can leverage industry data to achieve better business outcomes. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Beyond Distribution with GTDC, and enjoy the conversation.
Hello, everybody. I'm here today with two folks from IDC that I'd like to introduce you to, and we're going to talk about the GTDC IDC partnership. So with me today is Eric Prothero, who is Senior VP of Data and Analytics for IDC, and Steve White, who's VP of Channels and Alliances Research. So before we get started and talk about the relationship and the partnership that we've had in place for a little while, maybe Eric, you and Steve could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, thanks, Frank. Really great to be here. Thanks very much. I oversee all of IDC's data and analytics organization. We have about 530 or so team members across 42 countries around the world. And our job is to really be building and evolving the data solutions offerings that we have. And so this means sort of managing the methodology and the process and the tools that we use to build the data sets that we provide to our clients. I've been a long time with IDC, 29 years, in fact. I started kind of the first half of my career here was in Latin America, where I was hired to set up our operations in that region before I moved into my current role. So again, thanks for having me.
Yeah, great. Thank you for joining. Steve?
Yeah, so I'm Steve White. I lead our overall Channels and Alliances research organization. Not quite as impressive numbers as Eric's, I'm afraid. So we don't have 530 people. We have folks based in North America. I'm actually based near Toronto. And we also have folks based in EMEA and in APJ. We really cover the kind of the spectrum of the pyramid of partnerships, if you like, right from those one-to-one big relationships right through to the big programmatical things. And we kind of like the fact that everyone in the whole world is now talking about ecosystems. So they've all kind of come to us in the last few years, which is nice. I've been at IDC, again, not as impressive as Eric. I've only been here 13 years now. So, but that's a reasonable standing. So yeah, we deal with just about everyone in terms of vendors across the industry and also most of the distribution partners. So I'm very happy to be here. Thanks very much.
Yeah, Steve, thank you for joining. And, I know over the years in my time in the vendor community, our paths have crossed a number of times. And I know, as you mentioned, a lot of folks in the vendor community is very familiar with the work that you and your team, has been doing over the years for, particularly as it relates to the channel and where the channel is going. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But let me then start a little bit with talking about the relationship that we put in place with IDC. We've got really powerful partnership, and it started in October when we announced that our distribution data for North America, which comes out of the GTDC members, IDC would develop the tracker and take responsibility for that tracker. And we announced it in October, and we actually delivered it in January. And we're really pleased with where it's come in the last 3 months. Of course, as Eric knows, it was 9 months in the making, and a lot of work went into it. But Eric, if you maybe comment a little bit about what you've seen and IDC's view on the tracker and the data and its importance in the industry to all the participants and also to IDC.
Sure. Yeah, and maybe first just to chat about the partnership itself. We are really excited about the partnership with the GTDC and its members, and feel that it's off to quite a good start and kind of where we're headed. Our goal with with the partnership and how we're working together, Frank, with you and your team and your larger community is, we want to try to be bringing the best, analytics and insights to bear that we can to your members and have our analysts like Steve, for example, be a resource for them to really understand kind of what's going on in the industry and get feedback. So with that kind of as the background of the partnership, as you mentioned, we kicked off the product that we're creating on top of the data feeds that we're receiving in January. We have now this weekly North American distribution tracker product, which is what we call it. And we are in the product itself, we track kind of big picture. There are about 950 brands that are in the data set across 14 different technology categories and so forth. And then those 14 categories, we have a taxonomy that then breaks down to ultimately getting us up to over 175 different hardware, software, and services market categories. So it's a massive database that we pulled together, and we can get more into it. But at a high level, I think it's it's providing the distributors and now the vendor community as well too a really good view into what's happening in the distribution in the United States and Canada.
So Eric, and yeah, I mean, I will tell you that, when we were having discussions, one of the things that we valued quite a bit from a GTDC standpoint and also from the distributor standpoint was the depth of and the expertise in the market intelligence area that IDC brought to the table. And then certainly when you add your analyst network to that, it became even more of a decision that was easy for us to make to develop this partnership. Who uses the data, Eric, and why, from your standpoint, do you think it's valuable for the folks in the sort of in the ecosystem that are using it?
Sure. So I would say kind of big picture, we have three groups who are using it, right? So there's the GTDC members themselves, right? So they're receiving the data and they're understanding and seeing kind of how their share is changing, within in the larger group and what's happening in those trends and so forth, the trends of that. So that's kind of one big group of folks that are looking at the data. Also, then you have the tech community, right? The tech vendor community at large. And when we talk to our tech vendor clients, the personas, as we call them, kind of within the tech vendors are folks like the channel chief, right? That they're kind of using the data as the single point of truth in terms of what's happening and helping them manage their distribution relationships. You've got the persona of, the pricing manager within those vendors who use this, on a weekly or monthly data at a very specific kind of attribute level to sort of see how is competition pricing and what's happening there in the category in that feature set. And then the third big, group within the vendor community is sort of the category manager, him or herself, right? That they're looking to kind of position the category in their brand within it and to try to, do sort of a competitive a view of that. And I guess finally, there's sort of maybe more of a traditional kind of market intelligence manager who's sort of saying what's the overall trends in the marketplace. And that's maybe one more puzzle piece to kind of creating that story. So, there's lots of different folks within the vendor community that are using it and getting good value out of it. And obviously then that, the more that they know and understand, and then they can have the quite interesting and relevant conversations then with their channel partners, right? To kind of talk together about what's happening and evolving in the ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you from my days as a channel chief, we have always relied on the data. Back in the early days, and Steve, I'll ask you to comment in a minute on this because you were, have been part of this for a long time also, like I have. But we used a lot of this data to figure out what our pricing model should be back in the, the early days of the PC, in terms of what was moving, what monitor size and, what configurations were more popular than others. And second thing, I think very important is to track the competitive, landscape and what were our competitors doing? Because, there was a time back in the day when in the PC space when, there were pricing changes weekly. And, it got a little crazy. Steve, I see you nodding your head. So it'd be good for you to comment on what your thoughts are relative to that. And also, now you guys having this data and, having this, market intelligence, if you will.
Yeah, well, it was interesting as the conversations with you guys and us kind of went along. I spoke to a lot of our distribution friends, and we talked about how they do use it, because it was interesting for us to hear as Eric's team were building it out. And so that one source of the truth, I think, is one of the biggest things, which is, so that as a given distributor, you can kind of have the one place to go. You can make some comparisons. An interesting angle I heard as well was just, this is real data, and the IDC market data, which kind of complements this, is kind of futures. So there's an interesting balance there around kind of real-time shipments versus potential trends. That's a nice balance as well. But I do think the biggest thing is just that one version of the truth, because that's so hard to get to in our industry. It really is. So.
Yeah, and I'll also tell you that, for years, I was part of organizations that actually utilized this data for measurement purposes. In some cases, senior management.
Yeah, heard
purposes,
the same.
right?
Yeah, I heard exactly the same from one of the disties was telling me, this is how we pay our people. So it's kind of interesting. So that's really functional and practical. So.
Yeah, no, it is very, very significant. Now, I think the combination of real-time data combined with what IDC does and what IDC's been doing for a number of years is extraordinarily powerful. So later on, Eric, we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that you're thinking in terms of what's next and some of the, enhancements as it goes along. Before we do that, I want to bring Steve back in. Steve, it'd be interesting to get your perspective on, there's so much going on in the channel, right? People have been talking about digital transformation and cloud and hyperscalers and subscription models and all the stuff and it's one of those deals where if you kind of pause for 3 to 6 months, you're so far behind because there's so much happening. From your standpoint, what are the big trends? What are you seeing, and what are you thinking about as it relates to the channel and where it's going, and what vendors should be thinking about?
So you're right. It is a massive question. Well, I think the way I always look at this is kind of there's an environment that we're all working in, and the channel is something that's reacting to the big environmental change. So in terms of the technology environment, I mean, obviously the last couple of years, the impact of the pandemic on just all customers, all industries, all partners, distribution, and everyone has been kind of one of the biggest things. It's also driven a lot of interesting behavior. So there's a school of thought that when you have these crises, they compel some change to happen that maybe wasn't going to happen before. It was interesting very early on in 2020, I think it was Satya Nadella from Microsoft, CEO of Microsoft, came out and said, we've seen 3 years of digital transformation in 3 months. So that acceleration has been super interesting. I think what's also interesting is that if you think of the customer impact, so at IDC, what we had to do in order to track this was to track it more regularly. So our forecast became much more regularly. We were looking at customer intent, the impact they were having by industry, which is kind of interesting. That's a very fascinating one. And there's some industries we know and love that we knew were impacted. So, schooling, healthcare, travel was massively impacted. So all of those industries had a different kind of an impact. So that, again, that's all rolled on as the environmental impact. The other thing that I think is really interesting is I think probably before the pandemic, there were a lot of trends that I just think have been magnified. So cloud would be a really interesting example. When we've looked at our cloud numbers the last couple of years, they just continued to grow. They were growing already, but they've really accelerated. When we think about digital transformation, which used to be kind of a marketing term before all this came around, it's just widely accepted now. And it's interesting. We do lots and lots of partner interviews, and our colleagues do lots and lots of customer surveys, customer interviews. The term's just widely used by everyone now. And it's interesting. Just last week at our Directions event, I heard an amazing stat, which I still want to get my head around, which is our most recent survey tells us that 95% of customers now have a digital first strategy, which is a massive change again. So all of this change is then, rolled down and impacted channels. If you think about the kind of the new technologies that are actually coming along, most of them have been accelerated, and it's founded around cloud adoption. Cloud adoption has really accelerated across the board. If you think about some of the other trends that have gone on, remote work, which has become modern work, which we're still in that phase of change now. What will new work look like? That's interesting. Obviously, then security grows in importance because of that, because of the extreme touch points, if you like, that need to be secure. And then if you think about what customers are trying to do with technology, what's been interesting in this period, although we've been in kind of a downturn, it's been very different than the previous downturn. Technology has actually helped customers bridge the gap. So it's super interesting when you look at technology spend in the last couple of years versus GDP. Technology spend still very positive. So it's really helped customers bridge the gap. And they're just leaning in. I mean, they're looking to be more efficient with their operations. So they're investing there. They're looking to be more innovative in terms of reaching customers. So they've all done things there, and we've all experienced this. And then the other area that I think is just really, it's really made a flip is, originally we called it AI and ML, but it's kind of turned into being automation. And if you think, we all experience that on a day-to-day basis with our banks and our mobile operators and everything becomes much more automated. And that's a massive area of growth. And all of this becomes opportunities for partners who are out there and distributors and the vendors as well, because customers are saying, I want to make the most out of the technology with a business outcome in mind.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, you just went through a lot of what's happening. And all of that is happening from the customer standpoint, the end user standpoint. And then depending how you look at it, you either go back or you're going forward and to how do we then get that technology from the vendor to that customer? And then of course that, is the channels piece. So certainly as it relates to the overall marketplace, that all makes sense. What's your view on, because the folks that typically will listen to this podcast will do so because they've got interest in and invested in what's happening from a distribution standpoint.
Yep.
So I know the distributors well. I know you've been dealing with them for years, like I have. What's your view on what distribution's role is as it evolves into in this new digital world that we're now living in?
Well, the first thing I'll say is, and not just because we're working with you around this GTD stuff, is we're big fans of distribution. We're big fans of the role that distribution has always played. We always think distribution has been vastly underpaid for the huge amount of work that distribution has always done. We actually had that conversation at one of our councils, all our vendors in the room many years ago, and we were saying, you make this margin, your partners make this margin, and in the middle, distribution does all this work, and it's so thin. It's always been fascinating to us. My team are actually working on a document right now, which we're calling The Future of Distribution. And honestly, with this change of roles, our theme around this document is that the future of distribution is now. And I think what that is the now part is this move towards becoming much more of an aggregator. And we've heard this term used by a lot of the distributors over the last few years. So this move to the aggregation role, and then this incredible capability that everyone's been building around the marketplace in order to actually transact things, has just been, we've always been really impressed whenever we get on calls with anyone who's on this call probably, and they walk through what they've built. Every time we're more and more impressed. And I think that actually facilitates all of that digital consumption that we're talking about. So, if you've got customers who are looking to be digital first, distribution has actually set up the tools to do that. In terms of the role, we just see the role expanding, honestly, because I think, this is one of the things that I talk about rather glibly, which is lots of vendors kind of dip in and out towards saying that SMB is a focus. Now, SMB is a massive area. There's the S part and there's the higher part as well. what's interesting, most vendors kind of dip in and out and say that's an opportunity, but they don't know how to handle it. And I don't think there's a single vendor out there who's really set up to deal with that. And it's interesting, the last 6 to 9 months, again, we've had a lot of vendors resurface and say, hey, we're looking at this SMB opportunity. Honestly, my first answer every time is go and speak to your distribution partners. They can probably fix that, or you can get quick wins there really quickly because they're already set up to do these things. The other thing we've said to vendors around their distribution partnerships is actually, this is kind of interesting because we say you're strategic partners. So it's interesting, in a vendor, they'll have their kind of pyramid of relationships, and they'll have those strategic alliances, then they have the partner programs, and they'll have some ecosystem parts, and distribution kind of sits separately. We actually think distribution is very strategic just because of the things that you are co-investing in. And I think if you apply that strategic thinking to a distribution relationship, you gain much more, because I think actually you both see things very differently, and actually building that into the planning, I think, is super interesting. I think the last thing is really just kind of building that into the kind of conversations, if you like, because I think one of the things that we see, which is super interesting, is when we're dealing with folks in a vendor who are dealing with distribution, they understand the massive gains that distribution has made over the last few years. If you're dealing with someone outside of that team dealing with distribution, there's less of a knowledge of it, and it always fascinates me. So just before the pandemic, we actually had one of our client councils, and we actually had 3 of the distributors on a panel with me talking about the cloud marketplaces they were building. And, fantastic together, 3 healthy competitors, but very, very good story, talking about the way they were looking at it. And really the sign for me was as soon as we finished that session, the lineups for each of these guys was hilarious, because every vendor was like, I didn't know you did that. I didn't know you did that. So I think there's a job to do here around communicating some of this stuff more broadly from a capability and kind of strategy point of view. But I think that role just expands. I really do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. In fact, that's exactly what our job is at GTDC, is to educate the marketplace on what distribution is doing. I often say, and I say it kiddingly, but it's so true, the worst phrase that a distribution executive can hear is, I didn't know you did that. And that we get a lot of that, right?
Happens
and
a lot.
They get
happens a lot.
That,
happens a lot.
which is stunning if you think about it, right? The other thing that you mentioned that's really, really a good point, and in fact, we've got a piece of work coming this year to dig into this, is the notion that within the channel, the folks that are close to the channel, the channel team, the channel chief, the head of disti, et cetera, you're absolutely right. They know and they understand and they recognize the value that's being provided. As you get further away from that within the company, they have no less. And I lived this for years. I spent 30% of my time as a channel chief internally selling and articulating the value of my partnerships, both at the solution provider level and certainly at the distribution level. One of the things that we recently saw, and we just dug into a piece of research, and there'll be more coming, but we're using a company to help us do a little research on this, is when you survey the folks that are close to the channel, channel chiefs, disti folks, and you ask them about the traditional value, the traditional items that disti provides, very high. When you survey the same, ask the same questions to the non-channel people, like the direct sales leader, the product management people, for the traditional stuff, not bad, pretty high. When you add the new things, the digital transformation, the marketplaces, to your point, consumption models, subscription models, and the value that disti's providing there, it's like this. The traditional folks are bought into it, understand it. The folks that don't spend a lot of time with the channel. I don't know if you're seeing the same thing, but it's really
we do. Yeah, we do. And I think that's this challenge of the and it isn't a change of direction. It's an added evolution, which is kind of interesting. So, and it is interesting. We've been asked probably the last 2 years more than we ever had around the basics of channels. Like, why do you do channels? And what's interesting when you speak to, and so there's a couple of vendors we don't work with where I've helped to present to groups within the vendor, you know, to the marketing group, the product group, to the sales group, all crazy, cool, smart people. They just haven't experienced it. And when they haven't experienced it, so I don't think it's like general experience. It's very specific experiences when you've seen something and you've actually kind of walked through it. So even with the sales teams, when you walk through the benefits you can gain from doing that, they all kind of light up and go, that's kind of cool, because that's work that we don't have to do, that our channel and distribution partners are doing on our behalf. So I think there's a job to do still around just getting these folks over the hump. And I also think that's, you know, I mean, honestly, I'm seeing it in my head that when we have these conversations with our friends in the channel, so we only deal with channel folks. So we're kind of lucky in life. We're dealing with folks who work well with others, but there's almost a role for us to play to develop something, which is like a channel 101 again, just to kind of reset, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. And we're continually trying to do that. And Eric, as you can see, when, you know, two long-standing channel guys get into a conversation, we can go on forever about these topics. And so I didn't mean to get too far off topic, but it's really interesting to get Steve's perspective and, you know, as importantly, IDC's perspective, because, you know, you guys are viewed, you know, in the marketplace as a leader relative to market intelligence. So, you know, Steve, you and I obviously hadn't, you know, spent a lot of time together prior to this. And so we hadn't rehearsed that. So I was really glad that you said you believe that, you know, the value of distribution and what they do. Of course, I know that, you know, in the marketplace, you spent a lot of time with folks and you really understand it. And see, that's the difference. There are folks in the marketplace that talk about distribution, talk about channels. They really don't understand it. And you made the point of the vast amount of work that's done, and it's operational excellence. It's been work that's been done for 20 to 25 years. So
and massively undervalued. That's the thing that still stuns us.
Yeah. Although getting better, because if you know, one last point, Eric, and then I'm going to go back to you because I do want to talk a little bit about the tracker. But the last year, you know, guys, I know you've seen, there's been a lot of activity with, you know, Ingram getting purchased by Platinum and, you know, big, massive private equity investment. Apollo made a massive investment in tech data, and actually Warren Hathaway's company, Berkshire, also bid on it. And then they subsequently merged with TD SYNNEX, and now they're a public company again. In fact, I read something just today. I think they're ringing the New York Stock Exchange bell today or tomorrow, I think. But the point being, I think the value is being recognized in the marketplace, and you know, smart money is making major investments, which is good. So let's go back to the tracker, Eric, for a minute. I know that, you know, you've seen since the introduction, you've done had a lot of discussions with a lot of the vendors that are your customers. You've had discussions with the distributors. And I know as time goes on, you're planning enhancements. Just talk a little bit about, you know, what you're thinking about from that standpoint.
Sure, yeah, and kind of connecting back to the conversation that you guys were just chatting about. I mean, one of the things, you know, me being at IDC kind of forever, is that there's this really good relationship internally between kind of the data side of the house, right, which is what I'm kind of representing on this call, and then the, you know, the research side, which is Steve here on the call, and that kind of, you know, a lot of the discussion that happens is supported by the data that's being built, you know, behind it. And we can't build the right data unless we have the best taxonomies, which are connected through on the research side. So, you know, as we build out this data set that we're building with you guys as kind of matter of course with all the data sets, we're constantly, you know, thinking about what's the next evolution, what do the clients want to see from this that we're not doing. We talk to folks like Steve about what's the angle, what's the new segmentation, what's missing, how does it connect to other pieces. And so, you know, that's kind of an ongoing thinking that we have. But for this particular, you know, data set that we're creating called the North American Distribution Tracker, the couple big things that are coming up is in April, we're launching the whole software category and segmentation. And that's a big project and sort of big news, because that allows us to take, all the SKUs that are at a software level, right, being sold, and then group them into our taxonomy at very granular level. And that becomes quite interesting for both the vendors, but also the distributors as they look at that segment. The other thing that we're doing in the latter part of June is we're launching a new portal first for the GTDC members that will provide really good performance and pricing analytics on top of the data sets. So again, going back to some of those personas that I mentioned, everyone has kind of a different outcome that they're hoping when they look at the data and so forth, and the portal will kind of allow us to do that. So those are a couple of things that are coming up forward with that. And maybe one last thing to throw out there to folks to know about. We've recently kind of evolved another type of a data product that I see that we call the channel partner ecosystem. And that is a data set that looks at 260,000 and growing channel partners around the globe, where we've kind of profiled them and across lots of different dimensions. And as we look at that data, we then can start to connect that data to this data. For example, like where's the particular market moving through the channels and so on and so forth. So again, kind of a theme that we have at IDC is how can we keep, as we get a new data set in, how do we connect it to other data sets to try to drive more value back into the community. So those are some of the things that we'll see kind of evolving over the next couple quarters with this.
Yeah, I think that's great. And that what you just described is certainly of interest to clearly the vendor community, but also the distributors, right? I mean, there's tremendous interest in that because there's, I don't know how many, hundreds of thousands of folks out there in the marketplace that call themselves solution providers, et cetera, and to be able to kind of dig into that is powerful. So that's great. Well, look, this has been a really great discussion. Steve, any closing thoughts, anything you'd like to kind of add? I really appreciate, you spending some time with us today.
No, I think the thing that I always find interesting with distribution folks, and it's interesting, we get on calls sometimes, we need to be clear about who we're talking about, because when they talk about their customers, it's actually their partners. And we love that. We love the fact that distribution customers are the partners. I think for those partners, we're in a really interesting time right now, because we have, if you think of those stats, 95% of customers are now saying they're digital first. So they're open to this. All of our surveys, every single survey I see now has a response from customers saying they're open to working with the partner ecosystem more than they ever were before. So again, kind of lends towards it. One last thing I'll mention, which is a fascinating stat I saw last week, directions again, which is, cloud explosion going on, cloud adoption going like crazy. However, this little asterisk which says 50% of CEOs are still interested in understanding the value of cloud. So there's definitely a massive role for those partners to play in terms of helping customers navigate this complexity. And by the way, the complexity is not getting less, it's getting more. So anyone who helps them narrow that down, I think that's the opportunity right now.
Yeah, I agree. Well, look, we couldn't be happier at GTDC with the partnership. It has been a really, really great, I don't know, Eric, we started it 9 months ago, I guess, discussing it, maybe longer than that. And, since the launch, and, we now have a real product in the marketplace that, is very valuable with the North America tracker. So Eric, thank you for your time today. We really appreciate it. Certainly we appreciate the partnership. Steve, I know you and I will have more channel discussions coming up, and thank you guys. Appreciate your involvement.